Before we start, kindly subscribe to my channel and tell me, where in the universe are you watching from? The cold, metal walls of the research station hummed softly as Stana walked through the dimly lit corridors. The blue-skinned Sci-Fi officer kept her posture straight, her violet eyes scanning the facility with quiet intensity. Her armored boots clicked against the floor as she passed the tall observation windows. Behind the reinforced glass, strange creatures sat in their cells, some pacing, some curled up in the corners. Xena barely spared them a glance, except for one. She stopped at the last window, staring inside. A lone human male sat on the floor, leaning against the wall. His face was bruised, his dark hair messy, but his eyes still burned with something she couldn't understand. Defiance. It had been weeks since this human arrived, taken from some distant planet. The scientists had expected him to break, to surrender, to beg. That was what every other species did. But this one refused. He fought against his captors, even when they shocked him, starved him, tested him like an animal. He never spoke their language, but his glare told her everything. He would not submit. Xena tightened her jaw. It made no sense. Humans were supposed to be weak, primitive creatures. The Dominion had studied hundreds of species, and none had ever resisted this long. Why was this one different? Dr. Valric, the lead scientist, appeared beside her, his silver robes trailing behind him. His gray eyes followed her gaze, then he sighed, still curious about the human, Commander. Xena turned to him. He is unusual. Valric shook his head. A failed experiment, nothing more. The Dominion hoped to shape his kind into bioweapons, but they are unpredictable, not strong enough to be useful, yet too stubborn to break. A waste of resources. Xena looked back at the human. He had noticed them watching. Instead of fear, he smirked, a slow, deliberate expression that sent an uneasy chill down her spine. Valric tapped on his data tablet. We're terminating the project. The remaining specimens will be disposed of. Xena stiffened. And this one? The same. There's no use for a species we can't control. She should have felt nothing. She had seen countless experiments end this way. It was the way of the Dominion. Only the strong, the useful, were allowed to survive. And yet, as she stared at the human, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were making a terrible mistake. The battlecruiser's F-Arian cut through the darkness of space, its sleek black hull reflecting the distant glow of a dying star. Inside, Commander Xena sat alone in her quarters, her violet eyes fixed on the holographic report floating before her. The mission was clear: eliminate an unknown insurgent force that had been striking Dominion outposts along the outer rim. A simple task, one she had done countless times before. And yet, her fingers hesitated over the command panel. Her mind kept returning to something she had buried long ago. A memory, a face, a human. She clenched her jaw, pushing the thought away. That was years ago. The experiment had failed, and the creatures had been discarded. She had moved on. She had to move on. A sharp beat broke the silence. Her second in command, Vorak, a towering Sci-Fi warrior with deep red skin and piercing golden eyes, appeared on the comm screen. Commander, we've arrived at the target planet. No signs of a fleet, but he hesitated. Something isn't right. Xena straightened. Explain. We sent scouting drones ahead. The outpost below was wiped out. No survivors. And Commander, his voice grew tense. It wasn't a fleet that did this. It was one individual. Xena's pulse quickened. One. Yes, one. We checked the battle records. Whoever attacked moved faster than our sentries could react. No energy signatures, no ships detected. Just destruction. Vorak paused, as if choosing his next words carefully. Commander, the damage suggests close combat. Whatever did this, whoever did this, tore through armored soldiers like they were nothing. A chill ran through Xena's spine. That's impossible. Dominion soldiers were among the strongest warriors in the galaxy. No single being, no matter how powerful, could do this alone. Unless. She forced her voice to remain steady. Deploy ground forces. I want a full sweep of the area. Find whoever did this. Vorak nodded. Understood. The screen flickered off. Xena exhaled slowly, pressing a hand against her temple. It can't be. It was just another enemy, another threat. Not him. And yet, as the Zephyrian descended toward the ruined outpost, she couldn't shake the unease growing inside her. Because deep down, a part of her already knew. She was about to see him again, and she wasn't sure if she was ready. The Zephyrian hovered over the ruined outpost, its engines humming as dropships descended through the thick gray sky. Commander Xena stood at the open hatch, her violet eyes scanning the destruction below. The once proud Dominion base lay in ruins, walls torn apart, vehicles reduced to smoking wreckage, and elite soldiers lying lifeless in the dirt. This was not the work of an army. It was the work of one. Xena tightened her grip on her plasma rifle as she stepped onto the battlefield. This shouldn't be possible. Even the Dominion's greatest enemies would need an entire force to achieve this level of devastation. And yet, the reports were clear. There had been no fleet, no reinforcements, just a lone warrior who had torn through their ranks like a phantom. She turned to her second-in-command, Vorak, who was crouched near one of the fallen soldiers. His golden eyes darkened as he examined the wounds. These were not clean kills, he muttered. Some were crushed with brute force. Others were taken down with surgical precision. He lifted a cracked helmet. The metal caved in as if struck by something impossibly strong. Whoever did this wasn't just fast. They were precise and relentless. Xena inhaled sharply. It can't be. She had seen something like this before. Long ago. A sharp whistle pierced the air. The squad spun around, weapons raised. From the shadows of the ruined base, a figure emerged. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his form wrapped in battle-worn black armor that bore no insignia. His dark hair was wild, his skin tanned and scarred, but it was his eyes that froze Xena in place. Burning, focused, unbroken. She knew that face. It was him, the human from the experiment, the one who had refused to break. His lips curled into a slow, knowing smirk. "Took you long enough," he said, his voice rough yet steady. Xena's breath caught in her throat. He was alive, and he wasn't just surviving. He was thriving. Open fire. Vorak roared. Plasma bolts erupted from the Dominion soldiers' rifles, but the human was already moving. Xena barely had time to react as he dodged the first shots, weaving between the blasts with impossible speed. He was a blur of motion, rolling, sprinting, closing the distance faster than any Dominion soldier should be able to. Before she could blink, he was among them. A soldier lunged at him. In one swift motion, the human grabbed the attacker's wrist and twisted. A sickening snap echoed through the battlefield. Another soldier swung a plasma blade. He ducked under it, slammed an elbow into their ribs, and sent them sprawling. Vorak charged, raising his massive war axe. The human met him head-on, catching the strike with his bare hands. For a brief moment, the two locked eyes. Then, with terrifying strength, the human pushed back, hurling Vorak off his feet. Xena could only stare. This isn't possible. The Dominion had deemed humans weak, insignificant, but this one had become something else, something unstoppable. Then, he turned his gaze to her. For the first time in her life, Xena felt something unfamiliar creep into her chest. Fear. Xena's breath came fast as she gripped her plasma rifle, her mind struggling to process what she had just seen. This human shouldn't be alive. He shouldn't be moving like this, fighting like this. But there he stood, unshaken, powerful, like a ghost from her past. Vorak groaned as he pushed himself up from the ground, his golden eyes burning with rage. "Commander," he growled, gripping his war axe tightly. "This creature, he's not normal." The human let out a short laugh, tilting his head. "You're just figuring that out now." His voice was calm, almost amused. His dark eyes flicked to Xena, locking onto her like he knew exactly what she was thinking. "You remember me, don't you?" Xena swallowed hard. Of course, I remember. How could she forget? He was supposed to be gone, eliminated along with the rest of the failed test subjects. But instead of dying, he had become something terrifying. A force that could rip through Dominion warriors alone. The Dominion's greatest mistake wasn't keeping him alive. It was ever believing he was weak. She raised her weapon. "Identify yourself," she ordered, forcing her voice to stay firm. The human smirked, taking a slow step forward. unarmed, completely fearless. You already know who I am, Xena. The way he said her name sent a chill through her. He remembers me. Vorak snarled, stepping in front of her. Enough of this. He swung his war axe in a blur of motion, the energy blade crackling as it tore through the air. But the human moved first. With inhuman speed, he dodged the strike, sidestepped behind Vorak, and slammed his elbow into the warrior's back. Vorak stumbled forward, eyes wide in shock. The human spun, grabbed him by the armor, and threw him. A fully armored Sci-Fi warrior, tossed like a ragdoll. Xena's heart pounded as she stepped back, rifle shaking slightly in her hands. This isn't possible. The human turned back to her. Still think I'm just another failed experiment. She hesitated. He wasn't attacking her. Despite everything, he hadn't made a single move to kill her. Who are you? She demanded. He exhaled, his gaze darkening. My name is Cal. The name sent a jolt through her. It had been in the records, the last known human specimen, the one the Dominion abandoned on a barren, uninhabitable world. A world where nothing should have survived. You should be dead, she said before she could stop herself. Cal's smirk faded. Yeah, I should be. His expression hardened. But your people underestimated me. They underestimated all of us. Xena felt something unfamiliar twist inside her. Doubt. The Dominion had told her humans were weak. They had assured her they were no threat, but standing before her was living proof that everything she had been taught was a lie. Cal took another step forward, lowering his voice. You want to know the truth, Xena? Your Dominion feared us. That's why they got rid of us. But they failed, because I survived. His eyes locked onto hers, and I'm not the only one. Xena's breath caught. Not the only one. Somewhere in the distance, an explosion rocked the ruined outpost. Smoke billowed into the sky, and for the first time, Xena realized Cal wasn't alone. The ground trembled as another explosion echoed in the distance. Smoke and fire rose beyond the ruined outpost, painting the sky in shades of ash and red. Xena's grip tightened on her rifle, her mind racing. Not the only one. Those words echoed in her head, chilling her more than the destruction around them. Her people had discarded the humans like failed test subjects, abandoned them on lifeless worlds, but Cal had survived, and if he wasn't alone, the Dominion had made a terrible mistake. Vorak groaned as he pushed himself to his feet, glaring at Cal with fury in his golden eyes. Commander, he growled, steadying himself. We need to take him down. Now. Cal barely spared Vorak a glance. His attention remained on Xena. He could see the conflict in her eyes. You're starting to understand, aren't you? Cal said, his voice quieter now. Your Dominion lied to you. They told you we were weak. But the truth is, we weren't just strong. We were dangerous. He took a step forward. That's why they got rid of us. Xena's throat tightened. No, that can't be right. The Dominion would never. Would they? A sharp beep in her helmet's communicator pulled her from her thoughts. A panicked voice crackled through. Commander, we're under attack. Unknown hostiles. Moving too fast. Static. Xena's stomach dropped. The rest of her forces. They were being hunted. Cal didn't even look surprised. You should order them to retreat, he said simply. They won't win this fight. Vorak bared his teeth. Lies. The Dominion does not retreat. He lifted his war axe, preparing to charge. But Xena stopped him. Her mind was spinning. The facts didn't add up. One human should not be capable of this. Even Cal, strong as he was, should not be wiping out entire Dominion squads. Unless. Xena took a slow breath, forcing herself to ask the question that had been clawing at her since she first saw him. How? Her voice was low but firm. How did you survive? Cal studied her for a moment, then he smiled, but there was no humor in it. You mean, how did I survive when your people dropped me on a barren rock? He asked. His dark eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. Simple. He lifted his arm, rolling back the sleeve of his armor. Beneath it, his skin was crisscrossed with old scars, but something else caught her eye. Thin, glowing lines ran along his veins, pulsing with faint blue energy. Xena inhaled sharply. No, That's impossible. You recognize it, don't you? Kel said. Your scientists experimented on us. They wanted to enhance us, to make us weapons. They failed, or so they thought. He flexed his fingers, and the glow pulsed brighter for a moment. But the experiments didn't kill us. They changed us. Xena felt cold. They altered his genetics. The Dominion had tried to force human evolution, and it had worked. Cal's voice was steady as he continued. Some of us didn't survive. The weak ones died, but the ones who endured? His smirk returned, but this time, it was edged with something sharper. We became something else. Stronger, faster, more than human. A chill ran down Xena's spine. If there were more like him. Then the Dominion wasn't hunting failed test subjects. They had created their own worst nightmare. Xena's pulse pounded in her ears. We created them. We made them stronger. And now, they're coming for us. Kale stood before her, his expression unreadable, but his words had already planted doubt deep in her mind. The Dominion had altered humans, believing them to be weak. But instead of breaking, they had evolved. And now, they were fighting back. A sharp crackle in her earpiece broke the silence. Another distress call. Commander Xena, the enemy. Cock, moving too fast. We can't. More static. Then silence. Xena's hands tightened into fists. Her soldiers were being slaughtered. She had led them into a battle they were never prepared for. Vorak cursed under his breath, gripping his war axe. We need to get back to the ship. Call for reinforcements. His golden eyes burned with frustration. Commander, we should not waste time talking to this. A shadow moved behind him. Too fast. Before Xena could even shout a warning, a second human appeared. A woman. She was shorter than Kel, but just as fast. Her dark hair was braided tightly, her movements sharp and precise. In the blink of an eye, she was behind Vorak, her hand pressing against his throat. Vorak swung his axe. Too late. The woman twisted his arm, sending the weapon flying. Then, with terrifying strength, she lifted the massive Sci-Fi warrior off his feet and slammed him into the ground. The impact shook the earth. Vorak groaned, coughing up blood. Xena barely had time to react before the woman turned to her, piercing blue eyes locking onto hers. Predatory. Cold. You took your time, Kale, the woman said, her voice smooth but sharp. Kale chuckled. Had to make sure they understood first. Rhea. Rhea, another name from the records, another survivor. Xena fought to steady her breathing. How many of you are there? She demanded. Rhea smirked. Enough. A deep, sinking feeling settled in Xena's stomach. If one of them could wipe out an entire Dominion outpost, what could an army of them do? Kale crossed his arms. We're not here to destroy everything, Xena. His voice softened slightly. We just want the Dominion to know we are not prey. Xena stared at him. Despite his overwhelming strength, despite the destruction he had caused, there was no blind rage in his eyes, no bloodlust. He didn't want a war. But if the Dominion refused to listen, he would give them one. She exhaled slowly. What do you want? Cal's smirk faded. A message. Rhea pulled a small device from her belt and tossed it at Xena's feet. It blinked, a simple transmission drive. Kale stepped closer, lowering his voice. Take it to your superiors. Show them what we are. Tell them the next time they send soldiers to hunt us. His dark eyes burned. We'll be the ones hunting them. Xena's heart pounded. This changes everything. Kel and Rhea stepped back, melting into the smoke. Within moments, they were gone, vanishing into the ruins like ghosts. For the first time in her life, Xena felt something she had never imagined possible. The Dominion might not win this war. Smoke still hung in the air as Xena knelt and picked up the transmission device. It was a simple thing, small, metallic, blinking softly in her hand, but it carried a message that could shake the Dominion to its core. Behind her, Vorak groaned as he pushed himself up, his armor dented from the battle. His golden eyes burned with fury. They let us live. His voice was filled with disbelief and humiliation. They could have killed us. Xena didn't answer. That was the most dangerous part. Kel and Rie had proved they were stronger, faster, and smarter than any Dominion warrior, and yet they had left them alive, not out of mercy, not out of weakness, but to send a message. Vorak wiped blood from his mouth and turned to her. "We take the device back to High Command," he said, his voice like steel. "We warn them. The humans are a threat." Xena stared at the blinking light in her palm. A threat. That was what the Dominion had always seen humans as. But Cal's words echoed in her mind. "We are not prey." Her people had underestimated them, had used them, had thrown them away, and now the ones who had survived were back, stronger than ever. Vorak's voice cut through her thoughts. "Commander, you're hesitating." She clenched her jaw. She wasn't hesitating. She was thinking, and that terrified her. Taking a deep breath, she tapped her communicator. "This is Commander Xena. All surviving troops, fall back to the Zephyrian. We're leaving." A pause. Then, scattered acknowledgments came through. Some of her soldiers had survived, but not many. Vorak scowled. "We should stay and fight." Xena shot him a sharp look. "And lose more warriors." She gestured to the ruins around them. "We already lost this battle." Vorak tensed, but he couldn't argue. The outpost was in ruins. Their forces had been slaughtered, and they had never even seen the full extent of human strength. Without another word, they made their way back to the landing zone. What remained of their forces was already boarding the dropships. Some were injured. Others were silent, eyes wide with something the Dominion was not used to feeling. Fear. As the ship lifted off, Xena stood by the viewport, watching the planet shrink below them. Kale and the others were still down there, and they weren't hiding. Vorak stepped beside her. If the Dominion knew this was coming, why didn't they eliminate them sooner? Xena exhaled. Maybe they thought they already had. A long silence stretched between them. Then, Vorak muttered, "We should destroy that planet. Wipe them out before they become a real problem." Xena turned to him. "And what if there are more?" Vorak blinked. Her words hung heavy in the air. Kel had hinted at it. They weren't the only ones. If the Dominion's experiments had created more like him, spread across different planets, hidden in the shadows, Vorak clenched his fists. Then the Dominion must prepare for war. Xena looked down at the blinking device in her hand. War. The Dominion had spent centuries crushing weaker species, dominating the galaxy without opposition. But this time, they weren't fighting the weak. They were fighting something they had created, and the worst part, she wasn't sure they would win. The Zetharian cruised through space, its engines humming steadily as it made its way toward the Dominion's central command. Xena stood at the bridge's viewport, staring out into the vast, dark expanse. She couldn't stop thinking about the events on the planet below, about the way Kale and Rie had looked at her with their cold, determined eyes. They were not the only ones. The truth was still sinking in, heavy and hard. The Dominion had created an army of genetically enhanced humans, but they had never anticipated that the ones they abandoned would fight back. "Commander." Xena turned to see Vorak approaching, his golden armor scratched and bloodied from their earlier battle. He looked more dangerous than ever. His fierce gaze never wavered. "What's the next move?" Xena's fingers curled around the transmission device still clenched in her hand. The light was dimming, but its message had been clear. The Dominion's control over the galaxy was in jeopardy. "We'll present the data to High Command," Xena said, her voice steady, but there was a trace of something, doubt, lingering in her mind. "They need to know the truth. The humans aren't just a threat. They're organized, and they're coming for us." Vorak's lips tightened. "So we prepare for war, then?" Xena hesitated. She had spent her entire career following orders, believing in the Dominion's power. But now, with the terrifying truth revealed, she wasn't so sure. The Dominion had created their own enemy, and it wasn't the first time a failure had been buried under layers of secrecy. But this time, the consequences could be far worse than anything they'd ever faced before. "They'll want to strike back," Xena said slowly. "We'll make them understand that this isn't a simple rebellion. We're facing a force unlike anything we've ever encountered." Her eyes shifted to the transmission device again, the blinking light now casting an eerie glow in the dimly lit bridge. Kel's words still echoed in her mind, "We are not prey." The silence between them stretched, as if both of them were absorbing the weight of what lay ahead. "Commander," Vorak said, his voice gruff, "we may not have a choice." He paused. "The Dominion won't be merciful. They'll strike first, or they'll lose everything. We either fight back, or let them crumble." Xena swallowed hard, glancing out at the endless void of space. Was she ready for this? She had always followed orders, but now, the line between right and wrong seemed blurrier than ever before. "What if we're wrong?" she whispered. Vorak's eyes softened for the first time since their battle. "Then we die fighting. But we die knowing we stood against something real." Xena nodded, her heart heavy. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about something bigger, something true. She had seen the strength of Kel and Rhea. She had felt their power, the way they made her question everything she thought she knew. As the ship glided through the stars, Xena made a decision. She knew what she had to do. "Prepare the fleet," she said, her voice calm and sure now. "We're heading to the Dominion's command center. We need to get the truth out. The galaxy needs to know what we've done." Vorak raised an eyebrow. "You're going to take it to them?" Xena turned to face him, her expression resolute. "If they won't listen, we'll make them. The truth can't be ignored any longer." With that, Xena knew it was no longer about fighting for the Dominion's ideals or her own survival. It was about something more, the possibility of redemption, the chance to stop a war before it fully began. But the path ahead was uncertain. One thing was clear, though. The Dominion had no idea what was coming, and neither did she.